The analysis of demand pull inflation is just the reverse of everything we've just talked about. So the Keynesian viewpoint of, and for the most part, this is true on both recession and demand pull inflation. Uh, Demand pull inflation is caused by too much spending. In other words, the aggregate demand curve has shifted too far to the right. We're past full employment, and things are pretty good in terms of a very low unemployment rate, but we're experiencing inflation. And so in this case, just from the graph, I hope that you can see what government needs to do is to decrease total spending. In other words, cause aggregate demand curve shift leftward, and that would be accomplished either by a decrease in government spending and or an increase in taxes. All the analysis would hold true in terms of the GDP gap is the 0.5 trillion. In other words, the difference on where we need to be and where we should be, this gap here. But the AD shortfall would actually be the horizontal distance from point C, that initial point of full equilibrium, full employment and stable prices, at least in this time period, to where we are on the aggregate demand curve. So the actual gap would be the difference. The excess in this case would be the difference between point C, and I didn't label it, but it would be right here, and that's 18 trillion. So the actual AD excess is 1 trillion, not the half a trillion. So we could use all the tools of analysis in terms of the spending multiplier and the tax multiplier. So just to make sure we're on the same page, if we're going to, we being government, by the way, we're going to counteract, if we're going to try to choke off that excess inflation, we're going to cut government spending, decrease government spending, or increase taxes, or some combination thereof. Now, certainly, especially discretionary, expansionary fiscal policy is not without its critics. First of all, right after Keynes really developed this analysis and wrote it in his book, General Theory of Employment, Interest, and Money, that I couldn't remember on a previous video, the title, economists started actually doing the data on seeing if there were initial changes in spending, how that actually impacted total spending. And so all the studies, for the most part, showed that the actual multiplier was less than the theoretical multiplier. So a few things. First of all, prices are not totally sticky. There are certainly certain goods that are more sticky, if you will, than others, but prices are somewhat flexible, and so that degrades the overall power as a multiplier. We took care of that by looking at that flat line rather than where the aggregate demand curve actually hit the short run average supply curve on the graphs. And so that's an issue. And then another issue that I haven't seen actually in any of the textbooks, but certainly in my opinion is an issue, is the fact that if there's an increase in spending, that spending is not all spent on domestic production, but some of it leaks out. That's a leakage in terms of our imports in the country. Those dollars are leaking out. And so that does not impact in a positive way our economy in terms of an increase in spending on our domestically produced goods and services. But it leaks out, if you will. Another big issue with fiscal policy is lags. And when we talk about lags, that's just timing issues. There are delays. And so different books will have different titles for this, but I'm going to go with recognition lag, implementation lag, and impact lag. The recognition lag is the fact that, for example, GDP data only comes out every 3 months, every quarter. And so if you go by the official, well, actually it's unofficial definition, but the long-standing definition of a recession is at least 2 consecutive quarters of a decline in real GDP. Then it's 7 months into the decline in real GDP before we actually have the data to show that. So it takes a while to recognize that the economy has turned one way or the other, that we're now in a recession. Then the implementation of an increase in government spending and or a cut of taxes is not overnight. Typically, it takes a while because it literally takes an act of Congress and then the president signing it into law. And so it takes a while to implement some kind of change in fiscal policy, discretionary fiscal policy. And then let's say the president has signed this into law, this bill to increase government spending and or cut taxes to stimulate the economy. Well, not all that spending, not all that cut taxes is going to impact the economy tomorrow. And so there's an impact lag. This could last quite a while. As a matter of fact, I remember back with the Obama stimulus plan, they started having problem finding what they call shovel-ready projects. They wanted to increase spending on infrastructure and other kind of things, but there were just none of the things ready to actually happen. And so finding shovel-ready projects was a challenge and took time. There's also an issue in terms of just politics. Fiscal policy in terms of expansionary, increase government spending, cut taxes, oh, that's very popular. So government likes to do that. However, to fight inflation, the theoretical Keynesian idea would be to decrease government spending, cut government spending, and increase taxes. Well, that's not popular at all. And so politically, there's more of a bias for expansionary fiscal policy, even though maybe that's not what the economy needs. And so, yeah, that's what we've primarily seen for years after the Keynesian revolution in the 30s and 40s. And let's go back to the fact that expansionary fiscal policy causes government deficits. A deficit, by the way, is just when you're, and this is for anybody, so it's an individual, it's for government, businesses. A deficit is just when you're spending more than you're bringing in. Well, you can cover that deficit by various means. I actually have a whole topic on that. I probably won't have that posted in a video for a while this semester, but there are basically 3 or 4 things that you can do to cover that deficit. But the majority of what the government does is issue government bonds, notes, and bills. In other words, that's debt. So when you hear government deficits, that's usually on an annualized basis, the difference between what it brings in terms of revenues and what it spends. That's the deficit. And then to finance the deficit, then they go into debt. And so that's the difference between deficits and debt. The problem with government deficits, and especially debt, is number one, government debt tends to increase interest rates. That doesn't theoretically that's true. That's not always true in the real world, so that's a little ambiguous. But certainly, in terms of opportunity cost, if government is spending on resources, buying resources, that means those resources are not available for other productive things. And so there are certainly issues with government debt deficits. So this is a very brief introduction, believe it or not, to fiscal policy. But I hope that now you understand why the aggregate supply model is useful for helping us to understand the issues in the macroeconomy and then maybe ways to resolve those issues.